I'd now like to turn our attention to intervention studies. And what do I mean by an intervention study? Well, an intervention study is something where you do something to your participants. There's some kind of measure, you do something, there's another kind of measure. Now, there's all kind of complexities in this. You might have a control group where you don't do something to them, a group where you do something to them. You might then have the control group does the thing at a later point in time. There's all kinds of complexities here. But ultimately, in an intervention study, you measure pre, you do the thing, you measure post. So, for example, you do a measurement on anxiety, you have them sit petting a dog for 20 minutes, and then you do another measure on anxiety. You do a measure on well-being, they watch a video set in nature of lovely forestry scenes, you do another measure on well-being. To make it a really good study, you have a control group where they watch maybe a blank video, but they sit there for the same duration of time and then do a second measure. And what you're looking for is there a change in well-being for the intervention group and no change in well-being for the control group, which suggests that the intervention had an effect. You might then offer the control group down the line the opportunity to do the intervention. That's really good practice if the intervention is something useful. If you're going to do this really amazing mindfulness session with your participants, but only half of them because the other half are your control, that's really harsh for the control group. So, what's good practice is down the line, you'll then do the control group as well. So, you would do, let's say, you have one session where you get your intervention group in, you do the pre-measures, you then do the intervention, maybe the mindfulness session, you then do the post-measures, you send them away. You get your control group in, you do the pre-measures, they just sit twiddling their thumbs for the duration, the time that they would have been doing mindfulness. They then do the post-measures, so you can see whether sitting for that period of time has the same effect as actually doing the activity, the mindfulness. And then after they've done the post-measures, you then give them the opportunity to do the activity. So you then give them the mindfulness activity. The same would apply if you were running it over several weeks. So if you're running over time, then it'd be exactly the same. So thinking about maybe you've got mindfulness activities for 20 minutes a week for 3 weeks, and at the end of it, your control group and your intervention group both get measured on the post to see if one's had a difference and one hasn't. And then you offer your control group the opportunity to do the 3-week intervention. It's just good practice to not disadvantage a control group. If that's what you're doing, you need to think about how you're allocating your participants to these two groups, your intervention group and your control group. It needs to be somewhat random. So, how are you going to randomly do that? You also need to think about the nature of the intervention. What is it that you're actually doing with your participants? And you need to have that scripted down to the letter. You also need to preempt any potential risks associated with it. So, you need to really think about what are you going to be doing and what could potentially go wrong. Could a participant react badly? Could they get aggressive? Could they be overly sexual, flirtatious, inappropriate? Could they get distressed, upset? You need a script that basically lists all the potential problems and what you do in those situations. So it needs to be quite detailed in order to get ethical approval. You're also going to need pre and post measures. Again, I really recommend using online questionnaires for this. Flash up a QR code, they scan the QR code, they do the pre measure on their phone, they do the activity, scan the QR code, they do the post measure on their phone. If you are doing that, remember you need a way of linking them. So you're going to have to give your participants a unique code or let them generate a code. It could be something like maybe their initials and the last 4 digits of their telephone number, something like that. But something that's unique to them that they will remember when they fill in the next questionnaire, so you can link those questionnaires. So just some things to think about when doing an intervention. Most importantly, though, your intervention needs to make sure that it relates directly to your question. You're asking a research question, and that means your intervention needs to answer that question. So you need to think really carefully about the measures around the intervention. You need to think really carefully about whether the thing you're doing is directly going to answer the research question that you have asked. You can think about how you do this practically as well. If your intervention is a video, you might as well do the whole thing online. One questionnaire where they are asked some questions initially, the video then plays, and then they're asked some more questions. The benefit of that is you can get participants from all over the place to fill it in. They don't have to come into your actual area and visit your classroom or where you're based to be able to do the study. Disadvantage is you're not actually sat in the room with them. And so you don't really know if they've watched the video or they've just let it play and gone and got a cup of tea and then come back to fill in the second questionnaire. So pluses and minuses, but hold those things in mind. Think about what the easiest option is, getting the most participants, all of those kinds of important questions. Once you've considered all of those, you need to really think about what that intervention looks like in terms of ethics. You need to make absolutely sure that it is an ethical intervention and there are no significant risks to your client. And that's a really critical factor. Think about it in a lot of detail. Think about it in terms of exactly what the expectations are in terms of your research questions so you can be really clear about what you're doing.